Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Peggy Sattler, MPP for London West and NDP critic for women's issues. And I am pleased to have yet another opportunity to talk about my private member's bill, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Workplace Leave, Accommodation and Training Act, now known as Bill 26. This is identical to the bill that was passed unanimously in the legislature last spring. It has been endorsed by numerous organizations and individuals across the province. When the Liberals prorogued the legislature this September, the original bill died on the order paper, and so the whole legislative process had to start over again. So 3 weeks ago, I held a media conference to announce that I would be reintroducing the bill into the new session of the legislature. At the time, I believed that my only opportunity to debate the bill would be in April 2017. Today, I'm pleased to let you know that I was able to secure an earlier ballot date, which is what we call these things at Queen's Park, and I will be bringing Bill 26 forward for second reading this afternoon. So I am joined this morning by three panelists who will be sharing their perspective on the importance of the bill. I want to welcome Harmy Mendoza, who is Executive Director of Women Abuse Council of Toronto, also known as Women Act, Alejandro Gonzalez, who is Resources Development Manager at MCIS Language Solutions, and Dr. Christopher Mackey, who is Medical Officer of Health and CEO for the Middlesex London Health Unit. So the purpose of Bill 26 is to allow workers who have experienced sexual violence or domestic violence to get the support they need to deal with the violence without jeopardizing their employment. Bill 26 provides up to 10 days of paid leave and reasonable unpaid leave if necessary to do things like see a doctor, talk to a crisis counselor, find a new place to live, meet with the police, or go to court. Many of the services that victims need in the immediate aftermath of the violence, especially legal supports, are only available during the day, which requires time away from the workplace. Bill 26 is informed by research conducted by the Canadian Labour Congress and Western University's Centre for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. In 2014, they released a national study called Can Work Be Safe When Home Isn't? That was based on a survey of more than 8,400 employees, the majority of whom were from Ontario. 1/3 of these respondents had experienced at least one incident of violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. Of those who had experienced violence, 82% said their job performance understandably suffered as a result of the violence. Nearly 40% said it made them late for work or unable to go to work at all. 8.5%, almost 1 in 10, said they got fired as a result of having experienced violence. What was particularly striking about the findings was that the violence did not only affect the victims, it also affected their co-workers. For 30% of the co-workers, the stress and concern that they felt because of their awareness of what their colleague was going through had a negative impact on their own performance on the job. So there is a cost to employers when employees are distracted and unable to perform to their full capacity. Major studies by the Federal Department of Justice have estimated that these costs amount to $78 million annually for Canadian employers due to domestic violence and $18.4 million annually due to sexual violence. The reality is that employers are already carrying a significant financial burden because of the domestic violence or sexual violence their employees may be experiencing. By requiring employers to provide paid leave, Bill 26 effectively shifts those costs to helping survivors of domestic violence or sexual violence, enabling them to access the temporary supports that they need so they can return to work as productive employees. It is modeled after similar legislation in Manitoba, which took effect in June 2016, as well as laws that are in place in several U.S. states. I would now turn it over to Harmy Mendoza from Women Act to talk about the importance of the bill based on the work her agency does with survivors.
Thank you, Peggy. Well, first and foremost, I really want to thank you, Peggy, for reintroducing this bill. I can't possibly express my gratitude enough, and at the same time, I can't hide my disappointment of how long this has taken. A few months ago, Women Act, a member-based agency, reached out to key service providers in the woman abuse sector and several other sectors that provide support to victims of violence. The support was prompt, strong, and quite frankly, very inspiring. I felt particularly hopeful when I heard that this bill was supported and passed unanimously by the three parties. It absolutely made sense to me because the issue of domestic violence or violence against women is not partisan. It's the issue of violence against women. It's about basic human rights. We have heard from scholars, employers, and service providers how important the change of legislation will be to ensure victims of violence safety is enhanced. They have all agreed about the importance to obtain specific services related to the violence, like looking for medical attention or dealing with criminal, family, or immigration law matters or proceedings. Today, I want to add one very important bullet to this long list. How about ensuring victims of violence remain alive? How about making sure they are not murdered? Today, I will read a few names of women murdered in the context of domestic violence. Let's remember and never forget. Theresa Vince, murdered at her workplace. Theresa was shot to death by her supervisor, Russell Davis, on June 2nd, 1996, at the Chatham Sears store before he committed suicide. Lori DuPont, murdered at her workplace. Lori worked as a nurse. She was stabbed to death at the hospital where she worked. Lori was often harassed by her ex-boyfriend, Mark Daniel, the doctor who eventually killed her. Lori DuPont was slain on November 12, 2005. Daniel later killed himself with a drug overdose. Ravinder Kaur Bankdu, murder at her workplace. Ravinder was 23 years old when she was stabbed to death in her office and in front of her colleagues on July 28, 2011. Ravinder's husband had walked into her office around 11:30 a.m. that day, armed with a hatchet and two knives. Ravinder was stabbed 33 times. Camille Runk, murder in 2015 near her workplace. Camille was shot and killed outside her workplace the morning of October 30th, 2015. She had a protection order against her ex-husband, Kevin, and had complained to police 22 times before July and October 2015 about her husband harassing her. My question is, how many more victims will be added to this list? What do we need to do to ensure we, as a society, are able to protect those who need it the most? What do we need to do to be considered a priority? How many more? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harmy. I now would like to ask Alejandro Gonzalez from MCIS Language Solutions to talk a little bit about the benefits of the bill from an HR perspective.
Mm-hmm. So I find that the initiative is a very smart and compassionate initiative, and from the point of view that it might give the employer, or it will give the employer and the employee the opportunity to keep that employee at work. The few days off that they get might be enough to sort of keep them off the system, as in not having to stay at a shelter for a long period of time, or having to apply for employment insurance or Ontario Works. And at the same time, it benefits the employer because they might be losing a key employee to an issue of domestic violence. So from that perspective, the ability for the employee to hold on to their job can be a key component in coping with domestic violence.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Christopher Mackey, who is the Medical Officer of Health from my own community of London, the Middlesex London Health Unit, who is going to talk a bit about the public health implications of the bill. Dr. Mackey?
Thank you, Peggy. I think, first of all, your work in this area and your tireless efforts are extremely valuable, and on behalf of the public health community, I'd like to thank you. I'd also think it is important to thank all of the MPPs who voted in support of this bill when it came to the last session of Parliament, because that all-party and non-partisan support is what can really drive this sort of issue forward in the long term, make it a sustainable change that's really going to help vulnerable women and families. It's particularly important at this time in history when powerful men are bragging about sexually assaulting women and with impunity, that we take a stand as a society to say that sort of behavior is not acceptable and that we stand with the women who are affected. I'm here today as Medical Officer Health for Middlesex London Health Unit. The Board of Health of Middlesex London has consistently over decades now identified sexual violence and domestic violence as major public health issues. We're in good company as well. Toronto Public Health has supported this specific bill, Ontario Public Health Association as well, and public health authorities around the world and across Canada have recognized the importance of domestic violence as a public health issue. The physical trauma and psychological trauma are well known. They don't just affect the individuals; they affect the people around them, and they affect those individuals for years, if not the rest of their lives. And there's also important public health issues that are related often to sexual violence, including the potential spread of sexually transmitted infections and unwanted pregnancies. In public health, we spend a lot of time thinking about healthy child development and what do we have to do as a community and society and as families to make sure that our children are growing up in the healthiest possible way. And we know that that issues like experiencing sexual or domestic violence or even witnessing it can have a tremendous impact on the physical and mental well-being of children. And in fact, those early traumatic experiences are one of the most important predictors of the long-term poor mental health and physical health of children. And those early years are so important to get right. And anything we can do to support families to, I think, prevent and mitigate the impact of domestic and sexual violence is well worth doing. I spent 6 months last year working to help develop a poverty strategy for the City of London. We spoke with over 1,000 people, including hundreds of people who were living in poverty, and we heard over and over how important a gender lens was for addressing the issue of poverty. And also we heard about the issue of violence and how it can be a cause of poverty and also an anchor that weighs people down in poverty when they've experienced it. In fact, I see violence more broadly as almost analogous to infectious disease in the sense that it can have a very significant impact on a person's health. It could spread from person to person. It could spread from generation to generation, and it's something that we all need as individuals and as a community to work together to address. When you consider the fact that domestic violence often includes financial abuse, social isolation, and people that really don't have a lot of resources to draw on in times of struggle, it becomes obvious that we as a society should be supporting women and anyone who's going through this sort of situation. As an employer with about 300 staff, the Middlesex London Health Unit, like any employer our size, has seen this sort of issue in our staff. 4 years ago, we had a staff person who was murdered by her husband. Her name was Sonia Albarani, and we take every opportunity to honor her and the strength of her adult children that have been deeply affected by the trauma to their families. We also wonder if there's something more we should have done or could have been doing as an organization. The domestic abuse in this situation was not shared with other employees or the employer, but we wonder if we should have been doing more to make sure that our workplace was open to people disclosing this sort of thing and offering more support so that people felt that when they brought it forward, they would get the support that they need. I think that this sort of initiative is a crucial part of our social safety net. Again, I want to thank Peggy for bringing it forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I want to once again thank those who have joined me here today, those who have emailed or called or written to express their support for this initiative. I look forward to debating this bill this afternoon in the legislature, and I also look forward to the similar outcome that we had in the spring when the bill was last debated, with all party support across party lines to move this bill forward and protect women who are experiencing violence, people who are experiencing violence in our communities. Thank you very much.